Hi, Jeremy here, Damn Good Doctors Club. In today's video, we're going to be exploring the first principles of dosage for Chinese herbs and herbal formulas. And this is something that I get a lot of times in our group, even with seasoned practitioners, still have questions about dosage, especially in terms of converting from raw formulas to granules. This is because in my experience, I found the schools teach it backwards. They go to an arbitrary standard, and since I graduated in '09, maybe some things have changed, but so far from what I've seen, it really hasn't. This is an area of confusion for a lot of practitioners. So we're going to explore it today. We're going to go to first principles so that it's not somebody's opinion. It's just straight up facts, right? It just is what it is. So we're going to look at that, and then you can be creative from there, no matter what style of herbal medicine you're using, even if you're doing like formula combining, that kind of thing. So here we go. Let's get started. Honestly, it's no wonder why most practitioners are so confused when it comes time to do herbal dosing and then especially granule conversions. A lot of times in schools, they teach to an arbitrary standard, which means they'll say something like, oh, your patient should take 10 to 15 grams of granules per day. That's a good dose. But what that does is then we have to reverse from what goes in the scoop in the patient's mug to the herbs themselves, when really that's backwards, because how many herbs you need, what the dosage of those herbs are, that's what we build on to then create the plan for the patient and how much they should take. So sometimes a patient's going to need 5 grams of granules per day. Sometimes they're going to need 30. It depends on what herbs are in the formula and how hard you want to dose. So I'm going to show you a couple formulas. We'll break them down, and we're going to look at the first principles of this, which means we don't have a bunch of guesswork and all this stuff. We're not going to an arbitrary standard. Even some of the things that are done for convenience, like Taiwanese formula combining, sometimes with Campo practitioners, they'll be doing things where they combine a couple formulas. That can be done for convenience, and that's great. But we also want to know the underlying formula architecture so that we know what trade-offs, if any, we're making for the sake of convenience. So I'm going to break down a couple formulas for you. We have Buzhong Yiqi Tong, right? Buzhong Yiqi Tong. I'm going to abbreviate here. And I'm using Bensky, the old Bensky, this thing right here, this one, right? The old beat up one. I've had this thing forever. And I'm just pulling the textbook dosage out of here. And you're going to have to just deal with my handwriting. We'll just go through it together. But we have Huangqi, right? And they have a range here. We have 12 to 24 grams. Now this is for a raw formula, right? Renshen, I'm going to assume we're not doing a Dangshen conversion, right? Because then you'd be doubling that 9 to 12. We have Baiju, right? We have 9 to 12 on that. We have Zhigansao. We have 3 to 6 for that. Dangui, 6 to 12. Chenpi, we have 6 to 9. Shengma, we have 3 to 6. And our last one's Chaihu, and we have 3 to 9 for that. And I chose this formula for a couple reasons. One, it has a range, which is great. And then 2, it's a little bit of a bigger formula. We've got 8 herbs here, and some of them are dosed pretty substantially. So we want to be able to do the math and figure out what's our total formula dosage for raw herbs. And how this looks is if we make a little chart here. It's one of the best ways to think about this. And if we put raw for this column, and we put granule for this column, right? Then we have the raw is going to go here, the granule is going to go here, and we're going to have the formula, right, which is just what the daily formula should look like, and then we'll also have a weekly formula. So how this works is to get a daily formula to become how much herbs do we need per week, right? We would just multiply that by 7. Okay, so that's to get from here to here. That's what we're going to do. And I'll show you how this works in just a moment. Keep in mind, okay, I know that a lot of practitioners that do raw herbs, they'll take this formula and they'll make it up, right? And they'll make it into a bag and they'll say, okay, here's your pack of herbs. It's got Buzhong Yiqi Tong and it's got your total daily dosage in there. And then they'll actually boil that twice and get 2 days of herbal administration out of it. Okay, I know that. In practice, that's what we do. So if that's not clear, I'm going to draw you a picture, but basically you have your pack of herbs like this. And then the patient would take the herbs out, put it in a pot on the stove, right? Boil it for 20 minutes or whatever the instructions are. Then they pour that decocted liquid off, right, into a pitcher. You get the you get the illustrations and everything, right? And they'd strain the herbs, put the herbs in there again with more water, boil it again, and now add that mix to the pitcher. So now you've got a double batch. And this is a way to just be economical and help the herbs last longer, right? So you can get out of one pack, you can get 2 days of dosage. That's what they're doing here. That's fine, and that's an idiosyncrasy and a nuance for raw herbs only. So we don't need to worry about that when we go to granules. right? Because granules, we can't do a double granule extraction. It doesn't work that way. They're already extracted. We can't double it again. So keep that in mind as we're moving forward here. So what we're going to want to do is let's get a total raw formula weight for this. We're trying to fill in this box here. We're looking for Bujang Ichitong's total raw formula weight. Let's start on the low end, right? We got 12 plus 18 is 30. That's 39. That's 48. That's 51 grams at the low end, right? And then we've got 48 here. We got 66. And then we've got 18 and 6 is 24 plus 66. So that puts us at 90, right? 51 to 90 grams. So that's our range. Okay, now to get a weekly dose off that, you just multiply this times 7. And there you go. You can actually multiply it times 3.5 if you're doing the double pack job, if that makes sense. So why don't I go ahead and do that now? We've got 51, right, times 3.5 equals 178.5, right? This is how much grams on the low end to get somebody a weekly dose, right? We don't really think like this. It's more packs. You would just take a pack of this times 3 or times 4 or whatever to give them the packs for 6 days or 8 days, right? But just for the sake of the math, we'll do it. And then we have 90 times 3.5 equals 315. Okay, so that's our range, right? And I'm only doing this, I know it's redundant, but I'm doing this so we can come back to it later and see how this whole chart works, right? I'm going to make this a little bit easier to see. So the next step is to go from the raw formula to the granule, okay? So what we're going to do, we have a range here we're working on, so the low end and the high end. Now for granules, it depends on your concentration, right? Granules, most of them are 5:1, right? That's common. They're a 5x. Not always, though. So for example, if you're using a certain, like if you're making this in your pharmacy, right, and you know what's on the shelf, then you should know your concentrations. So you might look at this and go, oh, okay, all these are great, except I happen to have a Renshen granule that's at a 10x, not a 5x concentration. So you're just going to have to do the math for that, right? You would just do half as much granule if it's twice as strong. So there are going to be some little places for wiggle room there where you have to do a little bit of thinking and do the math, right? If you've got a 5x concentrate for everything except for one herb, then that one obviously you can't put it at the original dosage. You're going to have to cut that in half because your concentration's double, right? The other bit is very light herbs, very heavy herbs, right? So something like Jinyanhua, right? Something that's light and fluffy, that kind of thing, or Meiguihua, right? You might want to dose that at 10 grams, but in a raw herb formula, you probably wouldn't dose it at 10 grams because it would take up the whole pack. Yeah, and same thing for things like Longu or Muli, the heavier herbs, right? If you dose it at 3 grams, it's going to be this little crumb. So you have to up dose those. The best thing to do in those cases, and these are the outliers, this isn't every herb, but in those cases, you just want to actually contact your granule company and ask them, say, hey, how do I do the raw conversion for some of the heavier medicinals like Longu or Muli? How do I do it for lighter things like Jinyanhua? The last time I checked on this was over a decade ago. And the granule company I was using at the time, they said, you know what, you can actually treat those, you can dose them like the regular herbs because they're already decocted. We've accounted for that. So if you have Longu, for example, you can use Longu in the 9 to 12 gram range in a granule, and it'll come out just as strong because it's already been decocted. It's grams of granule, not grams of herb. So that's totally fine, right? You can a lot of times just skip that entirely, but just double check with your herb company because, again, it's been over a decade since I've done this. But let's assume those are out of the way and everything's very straightforward. It's just a 5:1. All you need to do is take your number here, right? And you just divide it by 5. So 51 divided by 5 is going to be, should be what, 10.2? 51 divided by 5 equals, okay, 10.2 to 90 divided by 5, it's going to be 18. Right? Now the heuristic, going to school and they say, everybody should have 10 to 15 grams of granule, that's a good dosage. Well, they're close, they're in the ballpark. But on our high end, we want to get that 18. We don't want to be limited to 15. And because we did the math, right, we're not going to be limited to an arbitrary standard. We can actually figure out the dosage range for this formula for the average patient. Now, what we're going to do next is go to weekly, because a lot of times you don't give a daily bottle of granules, right? The logistics is you're going to do a week or more. So all you got to do here, very simple, multiply those times 7. So we've got, let me get my calculator right here. So we got 10.2 times 7 equals 71.4 to our range is 18 times 7, 126. Okay, so somewhere in there is going to be your amount of granules you want to put in a bottle that's going to last your patient a week. Okay, so far what we've done is we've now built the dosages based on the first principles of what the single herbs in the formula need to be effective. Yeah, it's really important to understand this. I know the math can be intimidating. It doesn't have to be, because really you only have to do this once. When I had a clinic, I'm off brick and mortar now. I'm 100% online with the people I work with. But when I used to have a clinic, I had a raw granule pharmacy, and I actually would just make these labels for the bottles that I kept in-house, like the big jars and all that. And what I did was I just knew my raw formula weight. You don't even really need raw weekly, right? But I knew my raw formula weight, I knew my daily granule, and I knew my weekly granule. So I could very easily make formulas. I would just have that written on the labels. So when I had a patient come in, I would know exactly how many grams of a granule that they needed to go home with. And this especially helps later in a moment when we look at formula combining. Right, that's where a lot of this stuff starts to come to life, because you don't want to just take real big formulas and real small formulas and just mix them together to 50-50 just because it's convenient, right? Because you might be getting the dosages all over the place. So that's how we would pack out a bottle for somebody for a week. Now, the other thing to consider is their daily dose, because you have to give your patient some instructions. If we look at Bujang Ichitong, for example, and we've already established that we have a granule daily dose of 10.2 to 18 grams of granule, right? Somewhere in there. See, it's right here up at the top, 10.2 to 18. Then for our patient, a lot of times they give these little scoops, you know, when you do granules, they're like these little plastic scoops. I always tell them no scoops. Don't send me the scoops. I don't want them. First of all, it's garbage. I don't need to be contributing to like more plastic in the ocean or whatever. It's just trash, right? But second of all, people lose the scoop. And then that's one reason for compliance. Oh, I wanted to take the formula, but you know what? I lost that little scoop and I just didn't know what to do, right? And they think this scoop is like some kind of magical tool. It's not. The second thing with scoops is that people scoop differently. So some people, it's like you tell them to take 2 scoops or 3 scoops or 6 scoops or whatever, and they heap it up or they don't. And you want to start to control for this variability, because you give somebody a week's worth of herbs and they're done with it in 3.5 days because they doubled every single scoop, right? You got to account for the human piece of this, right? So I say no scoops, right? So we've done now no scoops. 15 grams per day is an arbitrary standard. We don't do that either, okay? We go from first principles and we figure out stuff that's actually going to fit in people's lives. So one of the things I like to do is I'll use units of measurement that people already have, like tablespoon, okay? People have tablespoons at their house. It's very standard. It's very easy. What I found out when I started to do some experiments here is that 1 tablespoon equals 9 grams of granule, okay, on average, right? So people know how to measure. They take a tablespoon, they take 1 scoop of it, and they're good to go with 9 grams. Now you can break this up however you like, because a teaspoon is a third of that, so it's about 3 grams. So you can do things in teaspoon units, you can do them in tablespoons, you can do whatever works for you. We also have, like, once I expanded into Europe and I started to have people I was working with over there, then they don't have tablespoons, right? Because that's standard units. So milliliters, right? 1 milliliter, well, 15 milliliters is 1 tablespoon. Okay, so we can do these kinds of conversions. It's very easy to give your patient instructions, right? So I know now that 15 milliliters equals 9 grams of granule. And people have these scoops at home. So you're not asking them to hold on to some cheap plastic little magic thing that they're only going to lose, and then they don't take the herbs, right? So if we go to dose this, if we're on the high end, and this is where now we start to look at some convenience, okay? But it's because we built a first principle architecture here that now we can play a little bit and we know what rules we're breaking. We have control, right? We're not just guessing. So if I want to go on the high end with Bujang Ichitong, 18 grams per day, that's awesome. That's 2 tablespoons. Okay, that's 30 milliliters for my European folks, right? If I'm dealing with somebody in the Netherlands or the UK or something like that, I don't tell them about tablespoons. I just go right to the unit that they understand. Okay, it's easy enough to do the conversion. So there's your daily dosage. It's very, very straightforward. You just tell the patient now, okay, take up to 2 tablespoons per day. Done. And now we know that we've maxed out the high end of Bujang Ichitong. If you want to go on the low end, we could tell them 1 tablespoon per day. That's going to give us 9 grams. It's just shy of the baseline bottom end dose, right? Now, if somebody's like, oh, I'm wanting to get my patient at the 12 gram mark or whatever. Easy, right? 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon, or 4 teaspoons. Okay, it's very, very straightforward. I find this way of dosing, the patient compliance is phenomenal. They have tablespoons, they have teaspoons, they have these things, they don't lose them, they don't need the magical scoop. Okay, so next we need to look at another formula so we can see how this plays out, because what I've just shown you, we came close to the 10 to 15 gram mark, right? But we're actually higher than we would have been if we were doing this little heuristic here. But I'm going to show you how it works on a smaller formula and why this is so important. Okay, so let's have a look at Wuling san, right? Smaller formula. So we have Zexie at 16, and we have Fuling at 9. We have Juling at 9. We have Baiju at 9, and we have Guizhi at 6. Now I've taken these out of that Bensky text, and there's instructions in there about how to get these kind of modern dosages, and this is what we're working with. So if we look at this, what's our total formula raw weight, right? Pretty straightforward. We got 27 plus 6 is 33. That's 49, right? 49 grams. 16, 25, 34, 43, 49. Yeah, good. Okay, so our total raw, I'm going to make the little grid again, right? Raw, granule, and we have the formula, and then we have the weekly. So the raw formula is 49 grams. Now, if you were going to give this raw, you could get 1 pack at 49 grams, right? And then just get like 3 packs of that, because people will make enough for 2 days off each pack, like I showed you. And then that would give you a 6-day dose, right? So you don't really have to do this for here. What we want to do is look at this granule, right? So we're going to be now dividing by 5, because these are going to be 5-to-1 extracts. If yours are at different potencies, then you've got to deal with that math, right? But when you divide it by 5, it's going to come up just shy of 10. What is this, 9.8? Right? Should be. I don't know. Let me check. 49 divided by 5. Perfect. Okay, good. 9.8, right? So that is our daily granule dosage, right? Now, if we look at Bujang, the minimum for Bujang Ichitang was 10.2. The maximum is 18, at least on the high end, right? Of course, we can play with these things as we need to with our clinical discretion, right? But just look at the difference. This formula doesn't really have a range. It's already been bumped up based on the Bensky instructions, and it hasn't even hit 10 yet. Now, I know some people will say, yeah, but the school said 10 to 15 grams. That's a great rule of thumb. Sure, right? But we're close to 10. The school's technically like not totally wrong, but we want to know how we got there, okay? Taking the herbs and then figuring out the dosage from the actual herbs, it gives you a command of the information that you don't get by just memorizing monkey see, monkey do. Well, the school said 10 grams or 15, right? It's not that. So what we know here is that we need 9.8 grams of granules daily for this patient. To get them a weekly bottle, what are we doing? Multiplying by 7, right? So what is this? 9.8 times 7, 68.6. Okay, very good. So how are we going to give our patient instructions on this? Well, we know that a tablespoon is 9 grams, right? That's close enough for every day. You could tell them a tablespoon that's like not quite level, just a little heat. Like you can give them the wiggle room, once you've done this work first. Don't start them with wiggle room. Or you could just say tablespoon, right? That's it. And just let them be at 9. It's a little bit shy. That's fine, right? You could do a tablespoon and a teaspoon and go to 12. Like you can play with the dosages how you want. But here's what's really cool. What if we want to combine these formulas, right? Because this is something, like I picked this up from Jin Zhao, if you are familiar with him. If you're not familiar with him, he's like a modern day genius, really, really cool guy. Sees about 150 to 200 patients a day, all herbs, very quick. His clinical clarity, his thought process is just on point. And this is a combo that he likes to use is Bujang Yichitang plus Wuling san, right? And we'll just combine them. So now if we're looking at the formula combining school, like Taiwanese granule combinations and all that, we don't want to just look at these and go, okay, there's 2 formulas, so it must be 50-50, right? So we're going to make the dosage just split, like 50% Bujang, 50% Wuling san, because what we know from doing our first principle work here is that they have different amounts that are required. Right? Now, the low end of Bujang Ichitang will pretty much work here because Bujang is going to go from 10.2 to 18 on a granule daily dose. Remember this right here? And Wuling san is 9.8, right? right here. We got that. So it's just math, right? But we want to make sure that we're understanding how we're affecting our patient. And the reason why I'm doing all this, I know this sounds like exhaustive and anal and everything, but because you want to get rid of all the errors in your thinking, so you're not starting with some random heuristic. You want to know exactly how you got to where you are, because if the patient doesn't respond exactly as you expect, you need to know what variables to play with, right? So if you're trying to get somebody, let's say somebody's got fatigue and they're fitting into this Bujang Ichitong pattern, right? Like they've got fatigue. Maybe it's a woman with pelvic floor dysfunction or some kind of organ prolapse, and you've diagnosed her. It's a little bit off label for Bujang, but it's still got that lifting effect, right? Maybe you've diagnosed her as like, okay, she's got the spleen deficiency, she's got some sinking going on, and then she also has some fluid accumulation in her lower burner, and she's not hot, right? So this is somebody whose tongue might be like pale, maybe they got some tooth marks in there, and there's a coat, it could be like white coat, not a yellow coat, so this starts to fit. We're looking at this and going, okay, this combo can work. Yeah. But I want to make sure that I know what I'm doing, because if I started a 50-50 mix of both these formulas, that means it's that low Bujang, like bottom end Bujang plus Wulingsan. And if this patient's energy level isn't coming up, right, or we're not getting that lifting action that we were looking for from the Bujang, we need to know that we have a lot of room. We can still double this yet, right? So what we might do is 2-to-1, right? 2 parts Bujang, 1 part Wulingsan. And that'll give you your ratios. So when you're looking at this, you would then say, okay, well, we're going to go 2 parts Bujang to 1 part Wulingsan, and all that is just the high end of this, right? So we'd have 18 for Bujang plus 9.8 for Wulingsan, right? So we have this. That puts us at 27.8 grams per day of granule dosage to do this formula combining. What that means is the school's heuristic of 10 to 15 grams would mean that you're wildly underdosing this patient. You're either giving a third of a dose or a half a dose of what you're trying to accomplish. So listening to that is going to get you in trouble. It's going to cloud your clinical thinking. You won't be getting results that you can analyze and interpret because you didn't hit a dosage threshold. Right? Now, this might seem like a lot. Oh my goodness. 27.8 grams. What is this? 3 tablespoons, right? Because they're each 9 grams. That'll get you 27. That's pretty close. 3 tablespoons per day. What could you do here if you wanted to? You could say, okay, 1.5 tablespoons 2 times per day. Easy dosage, right? Your patients can handle this. And now they're getting enough of the herbs. So we have to break this into like first principle thinking so that we know what's behind our instructions. That's our job, right? When we have a patient come in, here's what's happening, right? And I've spoken about this even in, like, we've got a program for annual members where I go deep into clinical clarity and what's happening here with the patient interactions. But basically what you got is there's a patient coming in, right? And they're hoping you can help, right? Something's wrong. And they're telling you all their problems. And your job, right, as the practitioner, is to think about that and then come out with some kind of intervention that will like save the day, right? And then that person can take it and then they're better, right? This is like in general what's happening. And so the intervention would be, here's your herbs, right? Oh, great. What do I do? What are the instructions? Here are the instructions, right? It's this many per day. Here's how we're doing it. You can't just understand this. Like the school said 10 to 15 grams for the formula. It's not that. We have to understand everything else. That like this part of your brain has to be so locked in that you know, because what's going to happen a lot of times, you can hit a home run out of the park the first time, but a lot of times it'll be an iterative cycle of feedback where the patient's going to take the herbs and say, well, that was good, but then here's what happened, right? And you need to know all the moving parts that led to your recommendations so that you can now modify and iterate. Your thinking goes from this grab bag of just clinical pearls that you try to grab and pick to all of a sudden everything's threaded to where you have this kind of clinical algorithm, right? But you're never going to achieve this if you skip a bunch of steps because, that looks too complicated, right? I think we know that's not too complicated. You can handle it. You're a pro. This book, this big fat book, I mean, you own that material, right? If this little math problem is too complicated, like, come on, you already have done all this, right? This whole massive thing, and this is just one of them. We've gone through thousands of pages of information. We can handle a little bit of arithmetic. So now that that's sorted out, you don't have to guess about dosage anymore. Wouldn't it be great to also not have to guess about which herbs to use or which formulas to use or how to pivot when your first move doesn't give you the results you were expecting for your patient? How to interpret that feedback, how to know how to iterate and adapt and evolve a treatment plan and develop possibly even a clinical algorithm where you have a lot of if-thens and your mental map is just right out there where you can navigate, and every single patient gets the same fair opportunity to go through your entire brain, not limited by just what you can think of right now. Right? We have a lot of expansive conversations around this clinical clarity within our group. I would encourage you, if this stuff speaks to you, go find the link, put in an application, and maybe I'll see you there. All right, get to work.